there, lovely people. Welcome back to another Writing Tip Tuesday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to help other writers become better writers. And this is a topic that I have spent a lot of time working on because it was one of the things that I was weakest in my own personal writing. So I have accumulated a lot of different tips and tricks and methods and different ways to make your dialogue better. And it is incredibly important to have strong dialogue for your characters because that's one of the main ways that your readers get to know your characters. If we're not looking through that particular character's POV, how they talk and their actions is how we know them. So making sure that all of your characters speak in their own individual and unique way will be super beneficial to making sure that your whole story remains completely cohesive. The first step that you should do if you ever want to strengthen any particular aspect of your writing technique and skill is to identify the problem. So for dialogue, there's a lot of different ways that things can be going wrong. For example, my writing in sophomore year of college, all of my characters sounded exactly like me talking to myself because that's what it was. And I was like, I would say this, so my character would say that, right? But if all of my characters' choices came out the same way, because that's what I would say if I was in that situation, they all sounded exactly the same and it was hard to distinctify who was talking, why they were saying what they were saying, and how that relates to their character. It could be so many things though, because there are a lot of things that have the potential to go wrong from writing dialogue. It could feel very forced. There could be too much exposition. It could be repetitive. It could feel awkward, stilted, and not flowing properly the way that you think it should. It could just feel sort of off. There's so many ways that there can be something wrong with your dialogue, but the benefit is that a lot of those problems are fixed by the same techniques. So my first recommendation would be to read it out loud. Read your dialogue out loud either by yourself and do some fun voices for the characters, or read it with another person, or have other people read your writing so that you can hear it. And make sure that you are actually listening. Hear the words that you wrote, not what you meant for them to sound like. Hear what they actually come across as, because that's what your readers are going to know. They aren't going to hear what's going on in your mind. They're just going to hear what the characters are saying. Make sure that you are paying close attention to how it sounds. Highlight the spots that feel off for whatever reason. Take notes for anything that you're like, I think this sounds too similar to this other person talking. Anything that you notice, highlight. Take notes, underline, circle, make yourself aware of it for the next time that you go through for edits. Some common things to look out for when you are reading through and listening to it are any bouts of very repetitious language where not necessarily they're saying the same thing over and over again, but it feels the same as something else that's already been said in the conversation, or actually just blatant repetition where you have a character with a catchphrase and they say their catchphrase a little bit too often for it to feel natural. You can look out for the rhythm of the conversation. Is one person overstepping on the conversation? Are too many people a part of the conversation that it's bouncing all over the place and you're having a hard time following them? Is there comedy that's just being missed because of the amount of words that it takes to get the joke out? Is there any unmotivated exposition? Is there too much exposition even though it is motivated? Your story should be exciting and it should take out the parts of life that people don't necessarily enjoy naturally. So if your dialogue feels like there's too much, it's going on for too long or anything along those lines, it could be because you have small talk in there or just the general niceties that are part of life. Your story doesn't need those unless it has a distinct purpose that matches with an action. So if you have somebody coming in and being like, good morning, how are you? I'm doing fine, how are you? You don't need that unless that is all a divisive technique that's like a spy is sneaking in behind them or something and they're distracting the other person. But even then, you would need to have some motivation for actually writing out the conversation rather than saying, I distracted them by talking to them about their day, because we don't need to hear the whole conversation at that point. So it's really a give and take, but generally, most of the time you don't need to write the niceties. We want to be in the action when we're reading it. So the dialogue can just skip to the start of the actual conversation. Have your characters come in with a purpose into the conversation. Start with that purpose and keep it going. So how do you improve your dialogue for the long term? How do you make sure that you're making the right decisions? for your dialogue. The same initial recommendation that I had in how to find out what's going wrong with your dialogue is one of the best ways to keep your dialogue healthy and effective throughout the rest of the story. Read your dialogue out loud. If you finish writing a conversation, read it out loud to yourself. You don't have to act it out. You don't have to do voices every time. Just read it and hear how it sounds. Read it the way that people would speak to yourself, mumble it, just so you can really pay attention to the words that are on the page. Because when you are reading out loud, you have to think a bit more actively than if you're just reading with your eyes, because your brain can make connections and jump over words faster than your mouth can. So when you read out loud, you have to actually address every single word that's on the page. You can't just, oh, I know what that says. Even if you don't realize that that's what you're doing, your brain's probably doing that because it has already read it. It was there when you wrote it. So rereading your own work can be difficult for that purpose, but that is the benefit of tricking your brain by reading it out loud. Another tip that I have is to really get to know your characters. Get to know all of your characters who are going to speak really, really well and understand their motivations, their wants, their needs, their goals, their aspirations, their fears, their history, who they are, influences how they speak all the time. Somebody from a background where they grew up in the inner city part of Chicago is going to talk a lot differently than someone who grew up in Eastern Connecticut. Those are different lifestyles. I don't know anything about Connecticut. Those are two very different lifestyles and two very different histories that are going to impact how they choose their words, what rhythm they speak their words, what words they skip, and what words they don't feel comfortable using. Your characters don't always have to say everything that they mean, so their motivations for saying things the way that they do versus what they actually mean internally can be a big difference too. Someone who's guarded about their past is going to answer a question about where they came from a lot differently than somebody who is terrified. And it's okay to get to know your characters more as your story progresses. You don't have to know them all by page 1. You are going to have to do edits, and dialogue is probably going to be something that you'll tweak and gradually change because you'll get to know your characters more. And you'll be like, wow, she definitely would not have said that. I don't know why I wrote that. That's so not what she would have said. She would have said this. And once you get to know those characters, they'll start speaking for themselves because you know them so well. You won't have to put words in their mouth, and then everything will flow a little bit easier, but it's going to take some effort. And for a little bit, you may have to put placeholders into conversation spots and just write out some dialogue that is dry and bland and wait until you get to know the characters and how they would handle that conversation, or if that conversation is necessary for who the characters end up being. It's better to know your characters at the end of your story and then go back and rewrite the dialogue to adjust for them than it is to try and force your characters to be who your dialogue makes them. Another way to put in some placeholders is to base some of your characters' speech patterns around the people around you, the people that you hear talking very often. Go to coffee shops and listen to the baristas talk to their coworkers, listen to people talk on the phone, listen to people talk around you, go for a walk and walk by people, listen to their conversations. Not in a creepy way, just listen to how their words work. Listen to how they structure their sentences. You don't know their story, that person that you were listening to on the road, but they have one. And you can infer some things about it from the way that they talk. You might not be able to get anything right, but you will make assumptions based off of it. And you should take what assumptions you make and input that into how you write your character's dialogue. Listening to other people talk is a really, really great tool, because if you're just locked in a room, sitting with your computer in front of you, talking to yourself, they're all gonna sound like you. Speaking from personal experience. For a while, I just walked around with a composition notebook, just like a 99-cent notebook, and I would write down interesting things that I heard people say, just so I could have something to reference. Somebody said that. Somebody actually thought to put these words together in this order, and I happened to hear it. And that's crazy because I would never have said that. That actually was very helpful for me to reference, to develop my dialogue styles, because I could just look at that and be like, yeah, somebody could say it like that because they said this like that. So even though it doesn't sound right to me, because that's not how I would say it, I think my character would say it this way. And then as I get to know them better, I become more confident with them actually saying things in ways that I wouldn't say things. And that's fine. That's how you get better better at dialogue, is to just keep doing it, basically. Practice makes perfect and all that. And dialogue is definitely something that will get better in your edits for sure. Don't put too much pressure on yourself for getting it right in your first draft. I highly doubt that you will. I know I never did, and I probably never will either. Make sure that when you are going through and you're editing that dialogue, that every single line that's in the conversation serves a purpose. And there's a lot of different purposes that they can serve, but make sure that they are serving some purpose. Keep in mind that every time a character interacts with another character, they are going to be putting on a certain performance of sorts for the sake of the person opposite them. So whoever they are engaging in the conversation with, they're going to withhold certain information that they might not have for somebody else, or they're going to tell them something, or they're going to dodge questions in a certain way, or they're going to overshare because that's who they are to this person. And you have to keep in mind that not every time your character talks to another character, it's going to be the exact same as the last time they talked to somebody, because people are very dynamic in that way. And every time you interact with somebody, a different version of yourself comes out a little bit, and your characters should definitely do it too. There can be like a group of people that they feel the same way about, but there should always be somebody that they interact with differently. Like a 16-year-old will talk to their friends a certain way, but they wouldn't talk to their parents the same way. They wouldn't share the same information between those two groups. There would be a disconnect there, and they might use a different way of phrasing things. They might use more slang with their 16-year-old friends than they would with their parents. They might use like please and thank you and ma'am and sir when they're with their parents a lot more than they would with their friends. So keep that give and take in mind when you're doing that. And remember that there's always potential to get better at it. Like even if you're like, man, this is the best dialogue that I've ever written, great job. Ride that high, go to the next scene and do it again. Like you can just keep writing better dialogue, and that's good. You can keep getting better at it, and you can also get worse at it. And that's okay, because it's going to be a learning process either way, but you have to keep trying. Otherwise, you're not going to get better. And that is one of the most important parts. Just to keep trying to get better, and you will keep getting better, and you will keep growing as a writer. Well, that is all that I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It'll really help me out. If you don't want to miss any other uploads like this, hit that subscribe button. I'm here every Tuesday for Writing Tip Tuesdays and every Saturday for Story Study Saturday. And if you have anything that you're trying to work on to get better at writing, leave me a comment down below. I would be happy to take any suggestions, anything that you want to see in videos, anything you want to talk about specifically. But otherwise, I will see you guys on Saturday for a Story Study Saturday.